to consider. And finally, for the gender and energy nexus, so I can't move my slide at the moment. No, here it's the concrete topic of energy poverty. So we know that poverty still has a female face due to structural also and strategic discriminations. So that is what we experience in the Empower Meet project, what we know of the data of the member states, for example, and there are many reasons. So it's, for example, there are socioeconomic reasons. So we know that European gender pay gap. I just see there are the data are wrong described. So we have a European gender pay gap in 2019, which is 13%. So women earn less money for the same job, for the same time they invest, and which leads to a gender pension gap, which was also in 2019 of 30%. And this comes out that women, they have less possibilities to invest, for example, money in energy saving devices, and they have less time, for example, to be active in the renewable energy sector. So there is a much higher risk to face energy poverty, for example, due to the socio-economic discrimination. Are there any questions? Because I'm hearing some noises. No, okay. And that means, so just to show here that when talking about energy and gender, of course, it's very important. So many people are talking, for example, to have more women in the sector of energy, of renewable energy, for example, in the sector of the productive work. But of course, we have more dimensions we have to consider when we talk about gender and energy. It's also to talk about the reproductive work, because we know then that more that women are much more busy with unpaid care work, and so they are suffering, for example, on time poverty. They have more duties in the households to care for families. They have less time for productive work. They have less time for other issues, for other topics, for example. That's very important, and it's not only energy and climate policy, for example, it's also work and social policy. Second is also the access to resources and public services. So here it's also, for example, the mobility sector, what is very important. We see very clear gender patterns. So also to see what is the need of people, of women, of men, of different gender in different situation of their life, and also to address it here for the whole mobility sector. So not, for example, only for the private public sector, but also for the private mobility sector, but also for the public sector. And for the resources, for example, it's when we talk about some grant programs on renewable energy, on energy poverty, on energy efficiency, also to take into account what are the needs of the different genders and how to address the people, because we also know from, I have a lot of data of Germany, so we know that, for example, some grant programs, they are more benefiting for men, and that needs to be considered when we design the programs, for example. We have the dimension of body and health, so where we know that we have a different perception of temperatures, of comfort feeling. So we have here different priorities to take it into account, and the dimension of the decision making. So to have in the decision making positions and processes also a good gender balance, so that all the needs and interests are reflected, and we have really a diverse policy, and we have diverse decision-making processes. And overall, the dimension of androcentrism is reflecting and showing the situation that we are in a very androcentristic world, which, for example, shows that many standards use male data, and then it sets a standard, and everything else is a deviation. And so, for example, when doing studies on medicine, when doing studies for cars, when doing studies for tools and devices and for renewable energy technology. So we mainly use male data, and I think that we need to take into account, and it means that we have a big gender data gap. And so it's so important for programs and projects like WELLBASED and EmpowerMed to take into account the gender dimension and to think about the different needs and interests and to plan the activities in a gender just way. And so to conclude with the introduction on energy and gender is with the energy transformation at the moment. So we are at the edge of a fossil centralized energy system going into a decentralized renewable energy system, which is a big chance we can use also to have a more socially and gender just energy transition. So to bring in more women, to strive for gender just energy and climate policies, to address the topics that women are facing, time poverty, for example. So that is very important. So to, yes, to include that dimension in the energy and climate policy on very different levels. That was a very short overview about the nexus of gender and energy. And now I just check if there are any questions. So if not, I pass over to Anke for the next topic of energy poverty and gender.
Yes, thanks a lot, Katharina. And I hope you can just go on with my slides, just skipping them. Yeah, we've already had now lots of links between gender and energy, and I would like to try going a bit deeper in terms of looking at energy poverty and the gender connections. So I mean, currently we really know that there are no, well, at least no legislative initiatives or legislation as such on the European level that addresses the nexus of gender equality issues and energy poverty. We do have initiatives that look at that in the framework of the Fit for 55 program. So there are some starting points to really try to understand and try to look deeper into this nexus between energy poverty and gender. In the framework of the EmpowerMed project, we did this financial support program analysis for a few countries, and we also realized that there is no taking into account of gender considerations in these financial programs. So that is what is currently at the status. If you could please skip to the next slide. I would like to give you a bit more of an understanding maybe of these dimensions that we have when we try to look at gender equality issues, and those dimensions I would like to break down in particular for the energy sector. Katharina has already mentioned a few of them, but what is definitely something where we always try to understand what are the different effects for women and men is the unpaid sector. It's the care work mainly, and then the paid work. So we could also say it's a reproductive and productive work. The one sector is unpaid, the other one is paid. And if we break that down on the energy sector, we realize that that means if we look at unpaid care work, we look at the household chores and child care, or also care for the elderly. And that all includes then what kind of energy is used there, in particular in the household. When we look at the paid work, we rather look at what kind of education have women and men, in what kind of professions are they then exercising, or are they earning their money. So we look a lot at STEM, at women and men in these technical professions. We look at working conditions, obviously also at the equal pay or the pay gap rather, and which also leads then to the pension gap, and Katharina has already mentioned that. Another dimension is this dimension of public services and infrastructure. So it's really about access to those services and the distribution. Here for the energy sector, that means how are women and men able to access the energy market, for example, in terms of, first of all, being part of the workforce, but then also being part of the users. Do they have access to very new technologies or new decentralized ways of energy production or energy distribution? That also depends on their roles. We had the dimension of the body and the health, so really the sex, which is really not related to their socially or social constructed roles. And here we know that women and men have different understanding or different comfort with various temperatures. It's also related to their different stages at life, be it that women are pregnant or being breastfeeding. Then there's also a component of gender-based violence. So there are various other parts to look at. We have the dimension of the information and the decision making, which is really about representation. And here we know, as Katharina has already shown, the different numbers of women being part of decision-making bodies, being part of boards of big companies. So it's all over the sector that we see their different different representation of women and men. And then last but not least, it's a benefit sharing. We also look at who really benefits from a specific action activity if we do that in the energy sector. And that's also then back to the role which is affiliated with women and men in society. If you could please move to the next slide. This slide repeats really these dimensions, but looks only at 4 of them kind of, and it's really about what are the factors that influence then energy poverty, or amongst women and men, or what does energy poverty then really also has an effect on in the role of women in their different roles. So again, we already spoke about heat and cold sensitivity. Health is an issue if there's energy poverty in the household. We know that this puts a lot of mental stress on those who inhabit the household, but probably you will know much better since your project is much more focused on those health dimensions. Economic, we already spoke about that. There's a specific factor which refers to lone parents, and I will give you a few more numbers later. And so social, cultural, which is about these socially attributed gender roles. If you could maybe please move on, Katharina. To the next slide, please, Katharina.
Can't you see it? I think so. My computer. I see it much quicker than you. Sorry. Can you see the poverty risk slide already? Sorry.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, it's a small, but we can read it. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit small, these numbers, but it's very recent numbers from Eurostat about poverty risks, because I mean, energy poverty definitely is mainly a cause of poverty itself as well. So it's really worthwhile looking at the poverty rates, and we know that about 22% of the population in Europe are at risk of poverty. If you look at this distribution amongst the sex, we know it's a bit more women than men. By age, we see it's interesting. It's more those who are under 18 than those who are over 65. Then households with children are more easily affected by energy poverty than those without children. And then the last number, I think, is quite obvious. It's more affecting those who are unemployed. And the next slide, please, that looks at the feminization of poverty. And that's what I said, lone mothers are much more likely to be poor than lone fathers with children. And then we also have that older women, so those 65 plus, are more often likely to be poor than older men when living alone. So that's also, I think, quite interesting. So the share of women among the older poor is 64%. I think that's quite important to know if we address energy poverty and gender. The next slide shows the unpaid care work, which is also obviously a factor for the economic situation of women still. And we see here, if we look at these numbers, regular and daily care work is definitely taken over mostly by women. And in general, I think the number is that women do at least a third more than men, if not 2/3. And that's just a little slide showing what it means if we have gender just energy concepts, if we have less inequality, that this leads to a more balanced power distribution, a higher participation of all disenfranchised groups. We will have more sustainable solutions, leading to a successful energy transition and a real transformation. And here we see those SDGs that are mainly affected there. I see that the time is running. I will directly go into the next topic, really. I think this is, you can skip that one, Katharina. I would like to start with the part on the European Green Deal and energy poverty. We know, if you could skip to the next or start the next slide. I don't know whether you've already done it and we're just waiting for it, Katharina, sorry.
So do you want to have the slide with a 6 dimension? Okay.
Yes,
can you see it now?
Yes, super, thanks a lot. The European Green Deal, the big framework program of Ursula von der Leyen's kind of new commission, at least it was decided in 2019, is the framework policy and for Europe. And I think it's kind of really key to look at that if we want to also address energy poverty. And what is interesting is that this European Green Deal really lacks a gender component completely. At the same time as the European Green Deal was adopted, we had the European Gender Equality Strategy adopted. Still, it's not at all reflected in the European Green Deal. And what we did, WCF, together with the European Environmental Bureau, we did a few studies about these gender gaps in the European Green Deal, and I think it's really interesting to look at those. We already spoke about that women are higher or live in a higher vulnerability in terms of energy poverty. But also if we look at other areas, and we have not really put here all the areas of the European Green Deal, but the industry, trying to mobilize industry for a clean and circular economy is here. So here that there is no recognition again of reproductive work. So the European Green Deal really, again, is just a growth strategy, not taking into consideration the enormous dimensions of unpaid care work, which are part of our European economic model and which should be much more taken into consideration. So it is still, in particular, if you look at technology and renewable and also other energy industry levels, that they are still very male dominated. If you look at the renovation and building sector, which is also a big chunk of the European Green Deal, which would need transformation. We have, in relation to gender equality, due to the gender pay gap and the gender pension gap, a lack of women really being house owners, being also able to decide on how their housing should look like. So they are not necessarily in a position to really introduce new technologies or try to renovate their houses. So that's, again, a flaw of the European Green Deal in terms of gender equality. If you look at the mobility and transport sector, Katharina has already mentioned a few numbers there. Still, the city's transport and mobility patterns are modeled against a male mobility scheme. We look at those who really go one way to work and back and do not take into consideration women who are more likely to really do multi-level trips because they go to take their kids to kindergarten or school, and then they go to work, and then they do shopping, and then they come home. And so that's not taken into consideration. If you look at e-mobility, we kind of assume again and reinforce, therefore, the male transport model, which is using private cars. For example, in Germany, it's 68% of those who are registered, those cars which are registered by men. So that's something which is not taken into consideration so far. We have the farm to fork strategy, and here again we also and the common agricultural strategy, they are also not addressing gender issues, even though we know that many women are working in the agricultural sector, but are not necessarily officially registered because they are working in kind of family-run or family-owned farms. So this is also something where we lacking those gender data, and or if we do have them, they're not necessarily taken into account. Could you please move on to the next slide, Katharina? For energy, we, in a separate study, we explicitly really focused on energy and the European Green Deal. And I just want to go maybe to those recommendations that we found there. And we kind of really said it's important to improve access to affordable and renewable energy if we want to address social and gender dimensions. We need to expand decentralized energy supply. So that's key. Promoting energy cooperatives, again, also, which are part of this decentralized energy supply systems. Here we also have still issues outreaching to women. We need to strengthen women's participation in the energy sector as such, be it at the public level or also in the private level. So public level meaning here really decision-making levels, be it parliaments or ministries and so on and so forth. We also need to empower women and men as energy consumers and providers of energy services. So this concept of prosuming is very important for just energy transformation. And I think here we also have to address the gender gap. Yeah, that's really what we found in these studies. Maybe, Katharina, you could show the next slide, please, which shows these two publications. They are available on our website. So if you're interested to look at those, or we can also send the links. Excuse me, I think that was my last slide. Not sure whether there's one more coming, Katharina, but otherwise I would hand over back to you. Yeah, these are kind of maybe a bit those recommendations or main findings that I've already kind of mentioned, in particular relating to the housing sector. And yeah, maybe the last point is really key. So if we kind of try, or if the European Green Deal is implemented as it's foreseen, and we are not going to take gender considerations into consideration, we will really reinforce inequalities, and so there is not going to be a big change in gender equality, or also in other social transformation. Thanks, and back to you, Katharina.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. I just stopped quickly to share the screen, so to see some of your faces and just to check if there are any questions, because we have a lot of input. We are happy to share, but if you have any questions, just let us know. So I would go ahead now with the EmpowerMate project, what we are doing here. Yeah, no questions so far? Okay, super. Yeah, great to see some faces. That's super. Okay, so yes, so here we are back. It's the EmpowerMate project, which is a Horizon 2020 project, started 2019. And so it's a project focusing on energy poverty. And one focus also is summer energy poverty, and also combined with gender and with health. And just regarding, for example, summer energy poverty, because you have some Spanish partners. For example, our partners from Spain, they found out that people are more struggling with summer energy poverty than with winter energy poverty. So to keep the dwelling cold during the summer times, it's more difficult than to keep the dwellings warm in the winter time. So that's very important. And so we also experienced, for example, that the decision makers on European level, they are not really aware about topics like this, and they can't imagine like the situation might be in some regions of the European member states. But overall, the topic of empowerment is to contribute to alleviate energy poverty and health improvement for people being affected by energy poverty in the Mediterranean countries. And so our targets are, for example, to implement practical solutions, to empower many people, more than 1,000 people, and also to work out policy recommendations and to work in a big network. So of course, with the energy poor affected households, but also with decision makers, with social actors having access to energy poor households, with utility companies, super key actors for good and socially just concepts to supply energy, health experts, and energy poverty experts. So that's overall our network we are working on. And what are we doing on a very concrete basis? So that's the frame of our project. So in the first step, so we mobilized key local actors in our region. So as I mentioned, so to work with health experts to show what might be the health impact, because we know that poor households have a higher probability to become energy poor. We also see that they have less capacity to face, for example, with health issues. There is a higher probability to be insured because they deal with firewood, they deal with candles, for example. Is a higher probability to on the impact on social health, of stigmatization. So just to be aware of these topics, to provide data and to show, to think about how to address the topics for medical doctors, for social, for health organizations. A second pillar was for the partners' capacity building and also for the key actors. For example, which solutions could be for insulation, so solutions for do-it-yourself, for example, small photovoltaic power plants to provide energy, because in many of our countries, so also heating and cooling is done with electricity, which is very expensive in most of the cases. So here too, we did a lot of gender trainings for the partners, also for key intermediaries. And yeah, that was a very important point. And our core activities you see here in the third column is it's done by our partners. So it's, for example, household visits. And here we consider, for example, to have a good gender balance of all genders on energy consultants. We have the concept of collective assemblies, where we invite energy poor affected people to have a safe room, to have to develop jointly new knowledge, new ideas, what can be done. So here, for example, we don't have the hierarchy between energy consultant and people affected by energy poverty, but the concept is really to develop jointly new ideas, which is mostly have been developed with our partners in Barcelona. We do a lot of do-it-yourself workshops. So I have mentioned, for example, the photovoltaic. So we did workshops in Albania for balcony modules, which could be used. So it could be applied in all member states because there is an EU regulation and you can produce very easily own energy, and so you become less dependent. And we did a lot of health workshops, so to show the impact of energy poverty and also the intersectionality, for example, with gender, age, race, education. So how is the impact and how to face and this topic. And so on the base of all the activities, so we analyze and we design recommendations on regional and national and in EU level. And finally, so we advocate for gender just energy policy, energy poverty policy solutions. For example, one point would be to have one pan-European definition of energy poverty, what we don't have at the moment, including gender. That would be very important, and it should be binding, and it would be a very important base for on European level and on national level. So to develop activities and to have legal frameworks. That is, for example, a very important recommendation. The second important recommendation is also to do gender trainings for decision makers and, of course, to provide more data. That are the activities, and here you see our partners. So we are active in 6 Mediterranean countries. So it's Spain, Italy, France, Slovenia, Croatia, and Albania with our partners. What we see, and here we are acting as gender and energy experts. And here you can watch our movie. I don't show it now because of the time. And here you have also the link to our project website where you find a lot of information, but we are also happy to share more information if you have concrete questions. So that is the Empower Mid project. And finally, before we start our interactive breakout session, I wanted to share with you some gender tools and instruments we have developed in the course of Empower Mid, in the course of other projects, and we apply. So the main message here is that we have a lot of tools and instruments. That's a positive information, and which can be applied in projects. So to gender mainstream projects, so to plan and to implement project activities from the very beginning in a gender responsive way. And the first gender tool, for example, is a gender analysis. It's maybe to check how many women and men, which gender are represented in which positions, for example, to analyze the material. So is it gender aware? Do we more use maybe male information, or do we have data? Do we think about which stakeholders we are working with? Do we include, for example, feminist or women's organizations? That is a very first step, just to check the situations, the projects, networks, or partners. How is the situation and whom could we, for example, also include? So for the first step. And the second is, for example, it's targets and indicators. So to think about, do we want to have quotas? Do we check, do we have surveys on the satisfaction of all the participants, of the partners, of the beneficiaries, for example? Do we want to define gender-specific goals to say we would like to have gender balance, we would like to have 50% in all boards of our committees, for example? Do we think about gender budgeting? So to think, where does the money flow? So who is benefiting of the measures, for example, just to have to think about concrete targets on gender budgeting, which is I have to admit, a big issue, but just to be aware that where the money flows, mostly the power is, the decision making is, just to have it in mind, and for example, a kind of gender monitoring to track the data, who is involved, who is benefiting, who is maybe discriminated. That is also a very important tool. And of course, very important is to provide gender information. That means gender trainings, to share gender expertise through experts. It's for everybody, for all gender, for men and for women. For example, also to share anti-discrimination training. Sometimes people or we are not aware about discriminating somebody, some people, and where we have, for example, very good experience in the Empower Me project and also in other projects is to have some awareness persons. So they are trained for facilitating meetings, for facilitating projects, so to be aware who is talking, just to check so that people have the same time to speak, to provide safe space, to be aware if there is discrimination, for example, and to deal professionally with such situations. So that's it's not an easy instrument, but it's doable and it's also affordable. And yeah, women empowerment. So it's really to have to actively empower women with mentoring, coaching, with networks, with meetings, for example, sort of collective assemblies. Here we have been able to mobilize many women and to structure and to design concrete trainings and qualification for women. And very important is communication. So in the energy sector, it's still white man communication we see in pictures, also in the language, and we always experience that gender inclusive language is could be a quick win, to be aware of it, maybe to check websites, to see how many which gender are represented, which age, people of color, white people, for example. That's very important to think about the internal and external communication, to have some netiquette, to have female role models. So that's also what we know out of studies, that women mobilize women to become active in the energy sector, and to have, for example, a recruiting strategy where we are able to address also women, so women are interested. And finally, of course, that's very important. So summarizing all our results of the project, so to develop policy recommendations for gender, just energy and climate policy. And here the point is so to get out of our silos in the policy and to have coherent policy to combine energy, climate, social policy. The gender equality strategy we see on the European level, we have it also in many countries, and so to make use of it and to think out of the silos. So the point is that we have a lot of tools. So it was really very quick. I know that it's a lot of information, but that is what we wanted to share with you, that if you're interested, just let us know and we can share more information. And here finally for the tools is, so gender is something for projects, for concepts, for policy. It's like costs, it's like feasibility. So it should be considered from the very beginning. So in the left-hand side, it's what you see. So you see the plate here, and we see at the moment a high interest and willingness to include gender, but we also see sometimes that at the very end of a project, there is maybe one gender training. So that's a bit exaggerated now, but there is one gender training, and so the gender target is done. But of course, on the right plate, it needs to be considered from the very beginning. That is very important for gender mainstreaming, so to come along to gender just concepts. Yeah. So sorry. That was our overview about a lot of information, maybe a bit overwhelming. So now it would be also the possibility to address some questions. And if not, we would split up in 2 breakout groups.
Well, I would like to thank you. I personally found it really, really interesting. As you say, a lot of information. I mean, each slide or each tool would have been for, I don't know, much time, but still very valuable inputs. I have made a lot of notes. And I like very much the idea of introducing it as a structural parameter, the design of a project. So I think we are in a good moment for that in our project because we are just starting designing the programs. So yes, I have one particular question, a specific question about the quota. If you have a recommendation of which quota of, in the case of recruiting participants, if you have a recommendation of what would be a suitable percentage to have as a goal, if 50% would be something fair, or maybe even more because there are more women affected than men, as you have stated, if there is any idea on that. Thank you.
Maybe I take the question, Noemi. In terms of participants, you are speaking about those taking part in the pilots.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's lots of discussions about quota in general and whether you need necessarily equal representation on all levels in order to have a gender just outcome, which is not necessarily the case. And obviously, more or less balanced is fair and fine. There's also that point to say, okay, if you work in an environment where more women are working anyhow, then you would also need to see that percentage represented at the level of this, at the leadership of that organization, for example. But in general, I really would say it's fair enough if you try to look for an equal representation, but do not spend the whole energy on really being totally equal on that, because that's making it too complicated, and in the end it's not a guarantee for gender just project.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, well, and it entails a practical difficulty as well, because it's already difficult to recruit participants. So it can be worth setting something sensible. Thank you.
I would add, because there are, for example, energy communities in Germany, they set up a program. So it's no mainstreamed at all, but it's a super concept. So they recruited maybe 20 women, and so they offered a program for them to become board members, supervisory board members, or management board members of energy communities. And so they are trained on 5 modules. It's what are the duties and the rights of board members. It was a gender training. There was they participated in management meetings, for example, and that was very interesting. And so it's just, I think you have to start, you have to mobilize, you have to qualify, and just to give this safe space also for women, and that's also very important. So it's a qualitative approach.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I like that.
There is one question of Miriam. It's a very, very crucial question in the chat. Yeah, that's our challenge. So to attract the interest of all gender, of men also. So we experience that events like this. So we have much more women in the audience, and that's very important. So to provide data, and also to have, for example, when we have panels, also to have not only female-dominated panels, because we strive in the energy sector not having only male-dominated panels, but it's I think it's what we are doing is to share information, to share arguments, to address, so to recruit men, to attract interest, because our experience is as soon as you stepped into the topic. So, and you have data, you experience how unequal it is and how unjust it is, and you want to be engaged in that. And I think that is our challenge, but we haven't made it so far. Maybe Anke, you want to add something, or?
Yeah, well, it's I'm always astonished that it's not finding more interest amongst men, because I mean it's an issue that is really for all of us of interest, and it's not about only gender equality. It's an equality issue in itself. It's about power distribution and about transformation. So I think these points have to be made also more visible, yeah, and then probably we reach more. I don't know. But there's another question, Lucy.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. Really interesting. I just wanted to add, perhaps from the perspective of thinking about men and gender equality, the case study that we will do in Leeds, we've recently selected the precise case study, and there's a really interesting pattern, which is there are more in the area in which these pardon me, apartment blocks that we're studying are, there is a substantially more men than women, and also so it's something like 60-40, and also many single person households. And in my research on energy poverty in the past, I've looked a lot at people's relationships, like how links to other households work. So for me, the red flag is probably single male households because men on average tend to have less social connections than women, and therefore potentially less social support. So I think those kinds of issues could arise. So we'll be looking for that in the case study that we do. So, and then I also wanted to say that for recruitment in WELLBASED, I mean, in my experience, recruiting participants into research, women come forward faster than men do. And so we may need also a quota for men in order to ensure that the women don't do all the work on the research in answering all our surveys and so on. I think that's really important, actually, because, you know, you can't, if we want to look across gender, we do need enough men in the sample to do that, but also it should maybe, in my case, be proportionate to the population, which is then 60-40 instead of 50-50. So it's something to be thinking about.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's very important. I think it stresses overall so how important it is for the whole society, and so to see the strengths of everybody. That's super important. And so in our breakout session, we wanted also to talk with you about the gender challenges you face in the pilot sites.
But there's another question. Please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to respond to Miriam about the gender topic, that it's not related to energy poverty, but we work with Roma NGOs, which are predominantly men-headed NGOs. I mean, the presidents and chairs are men. And in that we tried to gender mainstream Roma inclusion policies. So we started with them talking about how gender issues is also affecting men, then work our way through from men to women in changing their perspectives. For instance, we talk about how the responsibility of sustaining men is weighing on men, but then discussion grows out and they are more interested in, then we talk about women and all those patriarchal societies and injustices and etc. So it's always that you find things that are really affecting men. That was our approach in any case. So we had, for instance, 18 trainings for them, which were and they all participated. So I think that's a method, and that's all I wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah. I see there are many different challenges you are facing. So I think we could go on into our next session in order to collect them a little bit. We have prepared an ideas board, and I don't know, we will split up in 2 sessions, breakout rooms, and maybe Katharina, you will be group 1 and I will be group 2 in order to make clear that we do not write all in the same ideas board. We will share then in the breakout sessions. I think we will share the link, or it's also here, but then it's not easy to copy.
I will copy it in the chat.
Yeah, super. Okay. And I think Alba, you will split us up, as I understood.
Yes,
yeah,
we have thought
do it right now.
We have thought of 2 groups. Yeah, so in one group, pilot Turkey, Leeds, and Jelgava, and in another group, Valencia, Hirlin, and Obuda. Okay, for similarities between projects. Okay. Okay, so you have put in the chat the link to the questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now Alba, you're allocating us into the breaking rooms, right?
Yeah, it's me, it's Almudena, but I'm doing it. Just let me 1 moment.
Okay, little by little.
I think it should be working right now. I have opened the rooms. So Katharina, you're going to group 2, isn't it? Okay.
Okay, so I'm group 2. Okay.
Okay. There you go. And the people that remain in this room, where do you want to be located?
Okay.
We are group 1.
Yeah, Anke, I don't know why I'm going to assign you again. There you go. So, for example, Hande, it's in...
It's the first Turkey.
Okay. It's a little bit slow, sorry.
No worry, Almudena. We understand it's not easy because each one from a pilot, and if you don't know the names or who belong to where,
No, it's just the system that it's every time that a person enters is blocking.
Yeah, no.
So, Hande for the first one. There you go. Victoria, which one? The second in Valencia, okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I'm representing Óbuda Békás megyer today, but I cannot open the link. Could you help me in opening this?
Okay. We didn't know. Thank you, Agnes. I see how we can do it. Because you mean, Agnes, the link that Katharina has sent, right? Or Anke, this link.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can see in the chat window, but I cannot open
You
somehow.
cannot open it. Yes. The thing is that this link, I think they have created it, so I'm not sure who they have given access, but I would have guessed it's a common.
Maybe Barbara has the access, my colleague.
Who? Sorry. Barna.
Barbara.
Okay, if you can check with him, because I'm just open it and see if I can share it from here, but I can't. But for me it's weird because I would have said it's a common link because it's not generated from the project, it's from outside. So I don't know why you cannot access. Okay, Barna, we can ask him if he can access it. Yeah. Can you access the link?
Yeah, I could.
Okay, and I don't know if you can share it with Agnes in some way.
Okay. I have reached the website. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so I guess there's just the two of us, right, to be allocated, the three of us. Okay. And yes, Miriam, we said you would be allocated to any.
Hi, Agnes. I don't know what happened.
Hi.
In which group should you join?
I should join the group 2, I think, but in the end I managed to reach the website, so I can fill this form.
Yeah, the thing is that there are 2 rooms, separately rooms, and they are working by pilot site. So in the one group we have leads.
Okay.
En tu grupo, vale, pues ya está.
Okay. So,
Agnes, I'm going to introduce you to the Valencia group, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Agnes Lawson. There you go. Yeah, so you should open the group. The invitation is already done. You can see it?
I can see that chart. I can see the table with the stickers.
No, but you have to be in the team room. You don't have to see me. You have to see.
I understand. I don't see. I don't see my room. Only you at the moment.
Yo la he invitado. Agnes, you should accept the invitation. I don't know how is. No. She have to. There you go.
Okay, she should
¿Qué?
No puede entrar. Mira a ver si la puedes entrar. Dice que se ha ido ahora.